Narcissistic men build their identity on illusion, a carefully crafted mask of charm, confidence, and success. On the surface, they seem magnetic. They know how to say the right things. They understand how to create a persona that captivates others. Whether it's through their polished appearance, charismatic conversation, or exaggerated tales of personal success, they project an image of being powerful, desirable, and even invincible. But this image is only skin deep. It's not rooted in authenticity. It's rooted in the desperate need to be admired, validated, and seen as superior. Enter the real woman, grounded, emotionally intelligent, and deeply intuitive. She doesn't get swept up in flattery or fall blindly for the performance. She has done the inner work. She has faced her own insecurities, healed her wounds, and built her sense of self from within. And because of that, she carries a kind of inner clarity that is sharp, discerning, and unapologetic. When she meets a narcissistic man, she may notice the charm, but she doesn't stop there. She listens beneath the surface. She watches how he treats others, how he responds to criticism, how often he talks about himself versus others. She picks up on the subtle red flags, the need to dominate every conversation, the inability to take responsibility, the subtle digs masked as jokes. Her intuition doesn't ignore these signals. It amplifies them. Where others may see confidence, she detects insecurity masked as arrogance. Where others are drawn to his status or accomplishments, she sees the hollow core hidden behind the show. Her emotional intelligence allows her to differentiate between true self-worth and performative self-importance. And she doesn't confuse the two. What makes this even more threatening to the narcissist is that she doesn't try to fix. She doesn't fall into the trap of becoming his emotional caretaker, therapist, or admirer. She doesn't feed his ego. She questions it. She challenges the narrative, not with loud defiance, but with quiet self-assurance. Her very presence exposes the cracks in his mirror. And for a narcissistic man, that's intolerable. He depends on the illusion to survive. He thrives when people fall for the mask. But when a woman doesn't just see the mask, but sees through it, when she looks into the eyes of his carefully constructed persona and says, "This isn't real," it creates a profound sense of panic in him. It's like holding a mirror to someone who has spent their life avoiding reflections. He may react with anger, withdraw emotionally, or attempt to regain control through manipulation. But no matter what he does, her clarity has already done the one thing he cannot undo. It has made him visible, not as he wants to be seen, but as he truly is underneath the costume. This level of awareness isn't arrogance, it's power. Real women don't just spot lies. They feel the emotional dissonance behind them. And when a narcissistic man realizes that his illusion has failed to captivate her, he doesn't just feel rejected, he feels exposed. Control is the oxygen of a narcissistic man's ego. It is how he maintains the illusion of superiority, how he manipulates perception, and how he survives in relationships. It's not always obvious or aggressive. Often it's subtle, strategic, and wrapped in charm. He uses control to define the narrative, manage how others see him, and most dangerously, to shape how his partner sees herself. And while many fall into his web of domination, masked as affection, a real woman disrupts this power dynamic at its core. A narcissist doesn't want a partner. He wants a mirror, one that reflects back admiration, agreement, and obedience. He isn't seeking love, he is seeking control disguised as intimacy. In the beginning, he may appear supportive or even romantic, but it's all part of a deeper strategy. He studies her vulnerabilities. He learns what makes her feel seen, what she's longing for emotionally, and what fears she carries. And then he uses that information to slowly, methodically erode her independence, not always with force, but often with confusion, compliments that later become criticisms, affection followed by cold silence, promises that are never kept but always dangled like carrots. It's a psychological maze. But a real woman, one who has cultivated her self-worth, developed strong boundaries, and knows her emotional center, doesn't bend to this manipulation. She knows the signs. She sees the pattern. She has tasted her own power, and once a woman has found that, she cannot be tamed. And this is where the narcissist begins to lose his grip. You see, real women ask questions. They don't blindly accept double standards. They challenge toxic behaviors. They speak up when something feels off. They don't mistake gaslighting for passion or silent treatment for discipline. They don't shrink themselves to keep the peace. In fact, their emotional maturity creates a kind of resistance that narcissistic men don't know how to navigate. Because for them, relationships have always been about control, not connection. To a narcissist, the mere act of a woman saying, "No, that's not acceptable," or "this is who I am," feels like rebellion. It's not just defiance of his authority, it's rejection of his constructed identity. And real women don't just say these things, they mean them. They enforce their boundaries with action, not just words. If he tries to isolate her, she reconnects with her support system. If he invalidates her feelings, she revalidates them herself. If he tries to dictate who she should be, she becomes even more of who she truly is. That inability to control her, emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, is not a small inconvenience to the narcissist. It is an existential threat, because the more he fails to control her, the more powerless he feels. And narcissists cannot tolerate feeling powerless. Power, after all, is their drug. And when the woman standing across from him doesn't crumble under guilt, doesn't melt under flattery, doesn't soften under pressure, but instead holds her ground with fierce grace, he realizes something deeply unsettling. She doesn't need him to approve of her. She doesn't fear his withdrawal of affection. She doesn't collapse when he tries to intimidate her emotionally. Because her strength doesn't come from him. It comes from within. This infuriates the narcissist because control is no longer in his hands. His favorite tools, manipulation, gaslighting, emotional withdrawal, and guilt, fall flat when used on a woman who has already made peace with her own reflection. A woman who knows who she is cannot be shaken by someone who's still pretending to be someone else. Accountability is the one thing narcissistic men fear the most. And it's precisely what real women insist upon. For the narcissist, being held accountable is like being stripped of armor. It means being exposed for their mistakes, flaws, and failures, without the ability to twist the narrative in their favor. And nothing makes them more uncomfortable. You see, the narcissist's entire identity is built on the illusion of perfection. He believes he's always right, always justified, always the victim, never the one at fault. So when a real woman enters the scene and doesn't play along with that script, his entire sense of control begins to unravel. Real women are not cruel or confrontational by nature, but they are truthful, self-aware, and emotionally honest. And with that comes a natural demand for emotional integrity from others. If a narcissistic man lies, she calls it out. If he avoids responsibility, she questions why. If he hurts her, she names the behavior. She doesn't allow manipulation to masquerade as misunderstanding. She doesn't let patterns of disrespect go unchecked just because he offers shallow apologies or temporary affection. She watches patterns, not promises, and she listens to actions, not just words. This is devastating for a narcissistic man because unlike more naive or emotionally dependent partners, a real woman won't be baited into endless arguments or emotional bait and switch tactics. She won't waste time explaining why basic respect is necessary. She expects it, and not as a favor, but as a fundamental part of any real connection. When she confronts a narcissist with his own behavior, she's not trying to tear him down. She's simply refusing to be gaslit. But he doesn't see it that way. To him, being asked to take responsibility feels like a personal attack. He sees it as criticism, disrespect, or even betrayal. Instead of reflecting on what she's saying, he'll often double down on defensiveness. He'll deny, deflect, or even accuse her of being the problem. He'll turn the conversation around with tactics like blame, shifting. You made me act that way. What abotisms? Well, what about what you did? Or emotional guilt, tripping. Why are you always trying to hurt me? But a real woman doesn't get sucked into that emotional quicksand. She stays grounded. She knows the difference between conflict and accountability. Conflict is chaos. Accountability is clarity. And clarity terrifies the narcissist because it leaves no room for him to hide behind charm, excuses, or victimhood. In the narcissist's ideal relationship, mistakes are swept under the rug, apologies are weaponized, and forgiveness is expected without change. But a real woman refuses to play that game. If trust is broken, she doesn't just accept, "I'm sorry." She looks for consistency. If boundaries are crossed, she doesn't just get angry. She makes adjustments. She isn't controlled by her emotions, but she does honor them. And that emotional honesty becomes a mirror the narcissist cannot tolerate looking into. What's more, real women don't demand accountability just for themselves. They expect it in all areas of life. They value truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, integrity over ego. And in doing so, they disrupt the narcissist's pattern of blame and avoidance. They interrupt the cycle of emotional immaturity. They pierce through the delusion that he is above criticism or correction. This creates a power imbalance, not because the real woman is trying to dominate, but because she refuses to be dominated. She levels the playing field. She says, "You are responsible for how you treat people. That includes me." And for the narcissist, who has spent his life dodging accountability and projecting his flaws onto others, this is intolerable. He can no longer hide behind manipulation when someone is courageous enough to call it out. He can no longer maintain control when the other person isn't afraid of speaking uncomfortable truths. And so, the presence of a real woman, one who expects emotional maturity, honest reflection, and shared responsibility, becomes a direct threat to his fragile ego. At the heart of every narcissistic man lies a secret he will do anything to hide. Crippling, unbearable insecurity. His entire persona is a well-crafted armor built to protect a deeply fractured sense of self. The grandiosity, the arrogance, the constant need for admiration. These are not signs of confidence. They are compensations for the deep-rooted belief that he is not enough, that he is unworthy, that if someone were to truly see him, all of him, they would walk away. This is why narcissists are so reactive, so defensive, and so easily wounded by what appears to others as minor critiques or challenges. Now, introduce a real woman into this dynamic. A woman who is secure in herself, emotionally aware, and unshaken by superficial bravado, and everything begins to collapse. Because she doesn't worship his mask. She sees the difference between confidence and control. She values authenticity over approval. And that makes her dangerous to him. Not because she's cruel or dismissive, but because she mirrors back everything he's trying to avoid within himself. Real women carry a quiet power. It's not loud or boastful, but it's unshakable. It's the kind of power that comes from doing the inner work, from confronting pain, healing trauma, learning from failure, and rising stronger, not bitter. It's the power of emotional clarity, self-worth, and truth. When she speaks, it comes from a place of knowing, not pretending. When she loves, it comes from fullness, not neediness. And when she walks into a room, she doesn't demand attention. Her presence simply commands it. This is deeply intimidating to the narcissist who bases his entire self-image on external validation. To a narcissistic man, her self-assuredness is threatening because he can't manipulate it. He can't destabilize her with gaslighting or break her down with passive aggression. He tries to provoke jealousy. She remains secure. He withholds affection. She doesn't beg. He tries to make her question her worth. And she reminds him calmly and clearly that her worth was never up for negotiation. This creates a psychological crisis for the narcissist. How do you control someone who isn't afraid of losing you? What's more, real women often carry a deep emotional depth that narcissistic men simply do not know how to handle. She is in touch with her feelings, but she is not ruled by them. She can express vulnerability without expecting rescue. She can hold space for difficult emotions without collapsing into drama. This emotional fluency exposes his own emotional immaturity. Her emotional intelligence makes his emotional volatility look childish and unrefined. And rather than be inspired to grow, the narcissist often responds with contempt, dismissal, or outright hostility, because it's easier to belittle what you don't understand than to admit you lack it. Even her success, professional, personal, or spiritual, can become a source of agitation for him. A narcissistic man wants to be the star of the relationship. He wants to be the one admired, envied, praised. But when the woman beside him is accomplished, driven, and unapologetically in her power, it disrupts the imbalance he prefers. Instead of elevating him, her light makes his shadow more visible. Instead of validating his ego, her independence invalidates his illusion of superiority. She triggers something he has spent his whole life trying to avoid, the feeling of inadequacy. He may not articulate it. In fact, he might not even consciously realize it, but it manifests in subtle resentment, in dismissive comments about her ambitions, in undermining her decisions, in competing with her successes instead of celebrating them. He may say things like, "You've changed," or "Don't forget who helped you," or "You think you're better than me now." All veiled attempts to chip away at her sense of power. because her power makes him feel powerless. This dynamic becomes even more intense when she refuses to play into his emotional games, when she doesn't rise to the bait of provocation, when she doesn't react to his coldness with panic or chase, when she walks away from manipulation instead of pleading for clarity. Her refusal to engage doesn't just frustrate him, it exposes him. It reveals the emptiness of his tactics, the childishness of his behavior, the shallowness of his emotional range. And the more he is exposed, the more insecure he becomes. Not because she's trying to hurt him, but because her very existence, in truth, in power, in clarity, makes it impossible for him to continue living in the fantasy that he is untouchable, superior, or the smartest person in the room. To understand why narcissistic men despise real women, we must recognize that emotional abuse is one of their primary tools of control, and real women are immune to it. Not because they are invulnerable, but because they've learned to recognize it for what it is: manipulation, plain and simple. Emotional abuse doesn't always come in the form of yelling or threats. It's far more insidious. It hides in quiet dismissals, passive-aggressive remarks, guilt trips, gaslighting, the cold shoulder, stonewalling, and mind games that leave the victim questioning their own reality. This is the narcissist's domain, the subtle psychological warfare where he feels most in control. In relationships, the narcissistic man doesn't want connection. He wants submission. He uses emotional abuse to destabilize, confuse, and wear down his partner's sense of identity. He will invalidate her feelings, rewrite history, and punish her with silence when she speaks up. He'll love bomb her one day and then withdraw the next, all to maintain psychological superiority. He needs her to feel unbalanced because a confused woman is easier to control than a confident one. But this is where the real woman changes the equation entirely. She doesn't tolerate it. Not because she's never been wounded, but because she has healed. She may have encountered toxicity before, perhaps even in her past relationships, her upbringing, or her own inner dialogue. But the key difference is she did the work. She learned how to name manipulation. She educated herself on gaslighting, trauma bonding, and emotional invalidation. She strengthened her boundaries, reclaimed her voice, and most importantly, learned to trust her intuition again. So when a narcissistic man uses these abusive tactics, expecting her to bend, cry, beg, or chase, he's met with something he doesn't know: how to handle emotional clarity. Instead of doubting herself, she questions him. Instead of apologizing for reacting, she addresses the trigger. Instead of trying harder to earn love, she withdraws from disrespect. And rather than normalizing his behavior as just how he is, she sees it as unacceptable. The narcissist becomes destabilized, not because she's attacking him, but because she refuses to submit to the emotional maze he's created. She won't be coerced into silence. She won't be manipulated into guilt. She won't accept twisted logic that makes his bad behavior somehow her responsibility. For the narcissist, this kind of resistance isn't just annoying. It's a direct threat to the abusive system he's spent years perfecting. Real women refuse to be emotionally starved in exchange for conditional love. They don't tolerate partners who disappear emotionally the moment things get difficult. They see right through the psycho-idealized, devalue, discard, and they step out before it destroys them. They recognize when sorry is just a reset button, not a commitment to change. They walk away not because they're cold or unfeeling, but because they value peace over dysfunction, self-worth over approval, and growth over chaos. What truly unravels the narcissistic man is that emotional abuse doesn't work on a woman who has mastered her emotional landscape. He may try gaslighting, but she no longer second guesses her reality. He may give her the silent treatment, but she no longer fears abandonment. She embraces solitude. He may accuse her of being too sensitive or too emotional, but she knows that her empathy is a strength, not a flaw. The power of the real woman lies in her ability to remain rooted, even when someone tries to shake her to the core. Her boundaries are not walls built from fear. They are gates guarded by self-respect. She doesn't scream or break down to prove a point. She simply withdraws her energy. And that's the deepest wound a narcissist can feel, the loss of control over someone they once believed they could manipulate indefinitely. Every time she refuses to engage in circular arguments, every time she calmly names the behavior without reacting emotionally, every time she exits the conversation instead of trying to win, she is reclaiming her power. And the narcissist, who is used to being the emotional puppet master, suddenly finds himself without strings to pull. Perhaps one of the most deeply unsettling truths for a narcissistic man is this: a real woman does not need him. She may choose to be with him. She may love, support, and invest in him. But she is not dependent on him for her sense of identity, purpose, or wholeness. And that, for the narcissist, is a terrifying reality. Narcissistic men are drawn to dependency, not partnership. They crave relationships where their partner's world revolves around them. Emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. They want to be needed, not in the healthy, mutual way where interdependence builds connection, but in a toxic way that reinforces their superiority and control. To the narcissist, a woman who sees him as her savior, her source of happiness, her emotional lifeline, that's a woman he can manipulate. That's a woman he can tether to him through fear, shame, or guilt. That's a woman whose need for him makes her tolerable to him. But the real woman is fundamentally different. She's done the soul work. She's spent time getting to know herself outside of relationships. She has faced solitude and turned it into strength. She has discovered joy in her own presence, peace in her own decisions, and power in her own growth. She's not chasing a man to feel valuable. She's not using a relationship as a distraction from her wounds. And she's not mistaking attachment for love. This is incredibly unsettling for the narcissist because it breaks the dynamic he counts on, the dynamic where he plays the rescuer, the reward, or the better half. With her, he can't be the one who defines her self-worth. He can't play the role of emotional provider if she's already emotionally self-sufficient. And he certainly can't break her down with withdrawal because she doesn't fear being alone. She respects herself too much to stay in a relationship that drains her soul. Her independence is not just about money, career, or social standing, though it may include those things. More importantly, it's about emotional sovereignty. She knows how to regulate her emotions. She knows how to self-soothe. She understands the difference between intimacy and trauma bonding. She doesn't confuse attention with affection. And she no longer entertains connections where love is used as a tool of control. The narcissistic man, on the other hand, is emotionally dependent in all the ways he denies. He needs constant admiration to feel valuable. He needs others to reflect back a positive image of himself to feel real. He needs someone to serve as an emotional punching bag for his insecurities, and someone to idolize him to escape his shame. When a woman doesn't fulfill these functions, when she refuses to play these roles, she becomes a source of frustration, not admiration. He may attempt to destabilize her by planting seeds of doubt. You're too cold. You'll never find anyone better. No one will love you like I do. These are not expressions of love. They're weapons designed to provoke insecurity, to shake her balance, to make her question her completeness. But here's the truth. She's already walked through the fire of self-discovery. She has wrestled with doubt, loneliness, and self-rejection before, and come out stronger. His words might echo, but they do not penetrate. Even in moments of conflict, she doesn't collapse into begging for validation. Instead of proving her worth to him, she holds it within herself. Instead of fearing abandonment, she trusts that her path will protect her from staying where she's not respected. And instead of seeking his permission to be enough, she gives herself the permission to grow, to evolve, to walk away if needed. The narcissistic man finds this incomprehensible because in his world, power comes from being needed, from making himself indispensable, from creating emotional chaos, and then offering himself as the only solution. But this tactic fails completely with a real woman because she does not need saving. She has already rescued herself. Even in love, she maintains her identity. She doesn't become smaller to make him feel bigger. She doesn't shrink her light to protect his ego. She shows up as a full person, not half of a whole, and expects her partner to do the same. Not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. She knows what she brings. She knows her standards, and she knows that any relationship rooted in dependency is not love. It's control in disguise. The narcissist may pretend to admire her independence in the beginning. He might even praise it, calling her strong, different, or refreshing. But over time, it begins to erode his sense of power because he realizes she can walk away at any moment, not out of cruelty, but out of principle. And worse, she won't fall apart if she does. She won't be calling him back. She won't be posting cryptic messages. She won't be waiting for his validation to move on. This kind of emotional self-sufficiency is not just rare, it is revolutionary. It dismantles the very foundation upon which narcissistic relationships are built. It removes the hook. It neutralizes the game. It says, I can love you, but I don't need you to survive. I choose you, but I don't depend on you to complete me. And for a narcissist, that is not love. That is loss of control. What narcissistic men fear isn't just the individual woman who stands up to them. It's the ripple effect she causes. Because real women don't merely resist abuse, manipulation, or control for themselves. They model a different standard. They become an example, a mirror, and often a catalyst. Their strength doesn't exist in isolation. It radiates. And that ripple, once felt by others, is the narcissist's worst nightmare. Let's understand this. Narcissists thrive in environments where silence, shame, and secrecy dominate. They rely on isolating their partners, keeping dysfunction behind closed doors, and maintaining a carefully curated image to the outside world. They create echo chambers where no one questions their behavior. And if someone does, they're quickly labeled crazy, too emotional, or unstable. It's not just about manipulating the woman. It's about manipulating how others see her. The goal is always the same: to maintain control and preserve power through fear, confusion, and emotional fragmentation. But when a real woman breaks out of that cycle, not quietly, not bitterly, but with calm clarity, something extraordinary happens. Others notice. Friends who were once unsure begin to pay attention. Family members who felt something was off begin to trust their instincts. Colleagues, neighbors, and even people on the fringe of her life see the transformation in her, and they begin to question their own standards too. She may not preach. She may not even say much at all, but her energy changes. She stops making excuses. She stops over-explaining. She stops performing the emotional labor of protecting the narcissist image. She reclaims her story, her dignity, and her peace. And in doing so, she unconsciously gives others permission to do the same. So what truly terrifies a narcissistic man? It's not just the strength of a woman's voice. It's not just her independence, her boundaries, her refusal to play along. It's the truth she carries, the light she refuses to dim, the wholeness she discovered without him. A real woman cannot be broken by tactics. She cannot be silenced by shame. She cannot be owned by someone who only knows how to conquer, not connect. She is not here to feed egos. She is here to live in truth. She is not impressed by image. She is drawn to integrity, and she will not shrink to make anyone more comfortable. To the narcissist, she is danger. To the world, she is inspiration. To herself, she is home. Because she's not here to be controlled. She's here to be free. And once a woman knows her worth, there is no unknowing it. Once she's seen the game, there is no returning to it. She walks away, not because she's cold, but because she's finally warm with self-respect. And that is a power no narcissist can ever touch.